Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Lucy Beadnell. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at the ARC of Northern Virginia. And today we're going to be talking about the basics of supported decision-making, especially with an eye toward aging. I'm going to share some slides with you all. And if you're watching this recording later, always feel free to reach out to us at thearcofnova.org/answers and ask for a copy of slides or this information, and we're happy to share. This project on supported decision-making was originally part of a grant with the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, and we partnered with the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University now a good handful of years ago on this project. Today, we're going to talk about what supported decision-making is. How is it used on its own? How is it used with other supports? If we're going to do it, why? What are the benefits? How does this really apply to folks who are aging with our Eye Toward Aging month here in May? And then we'll start talking about some of the sticky what if kind of questions we get, but that's a great time too for you to put your questions in the chat and ask anything that worries you, right? As parents or caregivers or as a person with a disability, what about this approach gives you pause? Because we've got to be able to have honest, fair discussions to talk through the things that concern us. We'll talk a little bit about how to actually start putting supported decision-making into action if this sounds good to you, and give some examples of folks who've done that. And then I'll end with sharing a lot of resources. So during the presentation, I'm going to mention studies, articles, resource libraries, those kinds of things. And they're all linked on the slides at the end and available at our online supported decision-making library too. So supported decision-making is just a term to wrap around a very, very simple concept that we all do. And at its most basic, it's having people you know and trust help you understand and make your choices. Everybody in the world does this just about every single day. You know, it's everything from asking the person working behind the lunch counter, what do you think is good today? To calling your mom when you're thinking about changing jobs, to getting her advice, to calling your uncle who works on cars when you're going to buy a new vehicle, to talking to your aunt who's a physician when you're going to have surgery, right? This is what we all do. We think, who do I know who knows something about this? Or who I think is really smart, or who's always really helpful, or who I trust. I would love their advice. And that's what we all do. It's support to make our decisions, right? It can just be support to help understand our choices, or support to actually make those choices and implement them. And like we've discussed, for most people in the world, this is a really informal process. It's just part of life and conversation, what we do and the way that we learn. If someone has a disability or another ongoing need that makes it significantly more difficult for them to understand and make choices, they want to say, you know what, just the idea of I'll know who to call, when to call, doesn't work for me. I need something more formal. I need an agreement or a plan written down. And that's the kind of idea that we'll be going through today. But I think it's so important to understand that supported decision-making is something everyone in the world is already doing. So if this is interesting to you, you just know you've already got a jump start in the process. Supported decision-making is often viewed as an alternative to guardianship, and it certainly can be. So let's talk through what that looks like, right? Let's say someone with a disability is 18 or older, approaching 18, and we're thinking, can this person manage money on their own? Well, let's say a stranger sits down with them in a room and says, if you make this much money a week and these are your bills, how are you going to pay all of that? And we give them a pencil and a paper, or just ask them to answer out loud. That can be very difficult to answer. I'm great with math and numbers, and I couldn't do that. I use a spreadsheet and I talk to other people, and I do a lot of planning and thinking about the ways that our family can best spend and save our money before making a choice. And I get help to do that. And usually when folks do that, we think, that's a smart person. They know that they need some extra help and they know to get it. But sometimes when someone with a disability says, I don't know how to do this on my own, I need to get help, we think, oh, then you can't do this, and we're going to give this job away to someone else. So if we go back to our example of the person with the disability asking to make a budget, we may say, and this has historically been the view, well, you can't do this on your own, then you need someone to take this over for you. Supported decision-making is the lens that says, seems like you have an idea that money is spent on things, and you understand bills have to be paid, maybe beyond that, this is really tricky. Are you willing to work with someone who you trust to help come up with a plan? Are you willing to talk with that person and share your receipts with them, log into your bank once a week and check and make sure your balance is matching up? Are you willing to get help implementing this? Well, now we've gotten to a place where perhaps you can do your banking. You're doing it with the supports that you need, just like everyone else on the earth does it with the supports that they need. You may need more or less, but as long as you're really meaningfully participating in that, you're getting some help, then you're using supported decision-making. So supported decision-making is great for people, like we talked about, everyone in the world. Maybe you don't have a diagnosis, maybe you don't have any kinds of unusual needs, but we recognize there's nobody who's an expert in everything. None of us are going to know about the full extent of every medical decision or housing decision or other kinds of decisions we're going to make in life. No one will, right? That's impossible, but we all get help. Maybe you're someone with a disability who, like we talked about, is the person in the room trying to figure out their budget who can say, I can understand that money is important. I can understand that you should pay your bills. But honestly, the tricky parts about actually adding up those dollars and making sure everything goes just right, that's where I need help. That's a great place for supported decision-making. And we would start doing some problem solving and saying, okay, you need supported decision-making. You need help to understand and make these choices. What kind of help is that? If the money you have coming in is Social Security benefits, do we want a representative payee? That's the term Social Security uses to mean the person who manages your Social Security income. Or if that money is in a special needs trust, do we want to just rely on the trustee? We'll sit down and write a plan on what the money can be used for, and they'll talk with you as much as you need, and they'll auto pay your bills. Auto paying bills is like the best, or do you think that you're going to be earning a lot of money and we need maybe a financial power of attorney, someone who can really always go with you to the bank, always manage investments, always be a bigger part of this? What layers of support can we use to make supported decision-making work for you? If we've got someone, and again, we'll go back to this person in the room and we say, okay, what about with a friend coming in and a calculator and a financial advisor and folks who know you really well coming and talking you through? We'll help you make your choices. We will help you pay your bills. We'll help you get all this money stuff done. And this person says, or doesn't communicate anything to us. They don't say, we don't have eye contact. We don't have any indication that this person understands money's important. I'm going to need some help. Then you're probably going to need a guardian or a conservator to take over those choices. Because in that case, this person isn't getting help to understand and make their choices, even with all the help we give, layers of support, experts, explaining in a different way, more time, all those other kinds of things. If we still can't get to a place where this person can participate in their decision-making, then yes, supported decision-making is no longer an alternative to guardianship, but it may be used with guardianship. So maybe you have a guardian or conservator put in place because they really have got to make those decisions. We don't have a way of getting those answers back out from you in any kind of meaningful way or in helping you along in making those choices, or we haven't found out how to just yet, at least. Okay, well, it's still that guardian or conservator's job to know you and to know what's important to you, to keep you updated on the decisions they're making about your life, and to say, knowing about this person's history, culture, preferences, that should be guiding my choices as the guardian. I'm using what they can give me, and that's supporting me in making their decisions. So this is a very long way of saying supported decision-making is for everybody. In a lot of cases, it can be a really powerful alternative to guardianship because it's a way to build capacity. We take away the idea that to have capacity, to have the ability to do something means you do it all on your own, no help. And we build in the idea that to do something means you understand you may need help and who can help you and how, and you accept that help. Well, then all of a sudden you have capacity to do it, right? You have the ability to do it because you're getting the help that you need. And that's the whole point of supported decision-making. Why do we talk about this so much? Well, now we've got, goodness, 40, almost 50 years of studies showing that self-determination, that idea that I am as much as possible in control of my life, I am important, I have ideas that people listen to. I feel empowered, I think is the best word to describe that. That empowerment idea shows when people feel empowered and in control of their own life as much as possible, they are much safer and their quality of life is better. And if you are watching this as a parent or a caregiver, I as a parent will say, this is what I want for my kids, right? I want them to be as safe as possible and I want them to have a great quality of life. And so if what we know is empowering people in whatever way we can to be a part of their decision-making in whatever way is possible, makes them safer and gives them a better quality of life, this is worth pursuing. For a lot of folks with supported decision-making, working with their teams, we find that their independence increases over time, right? Folks with developmental disabilities may take much longer than typically developing peers to pick up some skills. They most certainly do learn and grow and change and achieve amazing things. So sometimes we've got folks who really took 15 or 20 years to learn to tie their shoes or get their morning routine down, but they got there, right? By using supported decision-making, constantly encouraging that person to understand and do as much as they can and giving them help along the way, we're really growing that independence, which is a great thing to do, of course. Something else we talk a lot about here is the dignity of risk and how important this is just as part of being a human being. I think often as my kids approach the teenagers, you know, for anyone, once you turn 18, you're a legal adult. Having had quite a few adventures in my teen and 20 years, I don't know very many 18-year-olds, any really, who the day they woke up on that birthday understood everything about adulting. They knew how to do all the things. They never made terrible decisions about racking up credit card debt or bad relationships or drinking too much or forgetting to pay a bill when they were at college, or that's part of life, right? That risk that we take as we're allowing someone to grow, we're handing things off to them. We know no one picks up a new skill and immediately does it perfectly. But that dignity of feeling like you trust me to find my way. Sometimes I'll make a mistake doing that. Sometimes I'll make many mistakes. But if I keep trying and improving, I'm going to get there. And you trust me to do that is the essence of empowerment. And that empowerment gets right back to what ultimately makes people safer, less susceptible to risk because they have felt their way through it. They've learned by experience. It's the difference between reading about a hangover in a book and having a hangover, right? If you read about it, you think, that won't happen to me. That can't be so bad. And then maybe one night you drink way too much and you think, oh my goodness, I don't ever want to feel this way again, right? It's that process of we were allowed to take the risk and we learned, and that informs us going forward. And that's such an important part of the learning process. There's not really a substitute for it. Of course, it preserves the rights of the person with a disability, which is hugely important from a civil rights perspective. We're a civil rights organization. But again, as we're speaking about empowerment, about how people are taught to view themselves and their importance in the world, telling them your voice does matter, you do control your life, you can vote, we do listen to you, really makes a very big difference in terms of people's quality of life and mental health. And it's minimal to no cost. I mean, you can, supported decision-making is this idea, right? Will help you understand and make choices. You can use all kinds of tools to implement that. Some of them have no cost. Some of them have very low cost. Supported decision-making, like we talked about, really is already being done by everybody, which is another huge benefit. You can start doing this in a bigger way immediately. Supported decision-making isn't some complex document that is written up by an attorney and that you go before the court to have a judge approve. So if you find the plans that you laid out aren't working, maybe the person needs more support, then you just change them. You sit down together and you figure that out. If you find out the person has grown and developed and they need less support, you sit down and you change the plan. You give that person kudos for all the great progress that they have made. And we look at things a different way and we peel back some of that support with making sure they still have what they need. I've been doing so much reading lately on brain development. And one of the books that I read, I thought it really stuck in my mind about saying, we want to give people just enough support to make them successful, right? There should be effort involved. There should be a sense that they can do it. We don't want to take it over for them, but we also don't want them to constantly fail. We want to work on layering supports around people enough to get them to a point of success. And ideally, over time, we can peel back some of those layers. So that's what supported decision-making is all about. And instead of saying, mom or dad or grandma or sister or brother or whoever is the big helper in the life of the person with a disability now needs to be that big helper forever, and they can never get sick or pass away or take a vacation or get their own disability that makes life difficult because they've got to be the person. Well, that's not realistic, right? That really sets us up for failure and a tremendous amount of stress on parent caregivers who age obviously much more quickly than their children and get to a point where they realize, oh my goodness, my adult child is likely to outlive me, and we haven't passed the torch at all. We didn't prime someone else to be their guardian, their decision maker, their helper. That puts us in a really tenuous position. Instead, supported decision-making looks at a team approach. It can be, we'll talk about building your team in a minute, but it can be layers and layers and layers of people who are involved in small and big ways, but so that no one person is responsible for knowing and doing it all, which is so important. I also want to note here that Virginia law in our code and the National Guardianship Association and widely respected best practices in the disability community all really clearly emphasize that the least restrictive option must be explored and truly deeply ruled out before we move on to something more restrictive. We should never take the idea of removing someone's permanent rights or any part of their rights away lightly. That's a big deal, and it has significant costs and consequences. Virginia has passed a number of bills and studies and had a number of work groups on supported decision-making, all of which say, yes, please, more research into this, more funding of this, more information about this needs to be shared, more pushing of this. This is allowed in Virginia. How do we get people moving toward this? And right now, I'm working on the tail end of a work group that our Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services has been running in 2022. They were tasked by our state government to do this, to look at how to make sure waiver users are really best aware of supported decision-making and supported decision-making agreements. They have the tools they need to build the kind of supported decision-making networks around them that they're going to need. So we're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the future. All right, now let's talk a little bit about this and the aging piece. When I first started looking at supported decision-making and similar ideas well over a decade ago, I sat down with a mom who had started doing this with her adult daughter, and she was great. And she said, Lucy, we were so concerned because the people we had to be on my daughter's team were like my husband and myself, her favorite teacher, my sister. Well, you know what? We're all 30 years plus older than her. We were scared. And she said, what I learned was we didn't want to make the perfect be the enemy of the good. We didn't want to say, if we can't start off with the perfectly dynamic, youthful, endlessly energetic and resourceful team, then we'll do nothing. She said that was the wrong take. What we learned was we're going to build a team here and they're going to age with our daughter. Maybe our daughter will have needs, and because they are a little bit older, they'll be able to say, oh, I've been through a knee replacement too. Oh, I've navigated Social Security benefits too. It's a great thing about having a team with diverse needs and abilities who's going to see you over the course of a lifespan, who can be there with you and lend their personal experience. That's what supported decision-making is all about, right? We're taking this expert advice. She also said, and this we came to find in talking to kind of supported decision-making and circle of support experts all over the country, is your support team, if you all stay active, if you keep working together, will grow and change over time and tends to kind of self-sustain. So here's something I often give an example. If you are a parent and you were married at some point in your younger years, think about who was in your wedding party. Are those still the people that you are best friends with now? Most likely not. Do you have best friends now? Most likely so. It's just part of life that people come in and out of our lives. That's okay. We don't have to be scared about that. But one of the great things about having a supported decision-making team on board is those team members tend to grow and find their replacements. We've heard many, many examples of people who said, yeah, I've been giving this person medical advice for years, and I am a nurse and I have a lot of background in this. And my daughter has been coming to me with the meetings, or she knows this person and we go to birthday parties together, and she's becoming a nurse and she's going to be the next member of the team, right? We pass our expertise, our skills, our culture, our experiences off to our children. Or we say, I've been your financial advisor for 30 years. I've loved being on your team and I'm going to retire, but I know you so well and I know my staff team so well. I've handpicked the person who I think you may want to invite to be a part of this with you, and I'm happy to set up a meeting, right? So supported decision-making is a great way about making sure this team continues to grow with you, continues to improve over time, and you're leveraging the strengths of everybody. And you've got older members on your team who appreciate what it means to age in place and really, like we talked about, have a lot of great firsthand expertise there to share. Okay, so here, one more plug before we move on. The National Guardianship Association has many, many, many statements, and they are the big guardianship stakeholder. It's saying, please do not pursue guardianship or conservatorship in any form until you have explored alternatives. And they repeatedly name supported decision-making as an alternative. Can you use this framework to layer in other kinds of support to really protect the rights and the safety of this person, because it's going to suit you better if you can. If you can't, then you can't. And that's life, right? Not everything's going to work perfectly, but they are really adamant about making sure that we have stop gaps and we don't ever pursue guardianship as a matter of course, right? Which is what things were for many years. Oh, your loved one with a disability is turning 18, you've got to put guardianship in place. That's what we at the ARC told parents. That's what parents were told by doctors and workers at the school, that this was just what you did. And what we've learned was we created some really catastrophic outcomes as a result. We cost families thousands of dollars. We set parents up to have no subsequent caregivers, people with disabilities up to have no subsequent team or other people around them with knowledge. And we further disabled people with disabilities. We took away their rights and choices and made them less safe in a lot of cases. So guardianship as a tool can be incredibly important. We have an amazing team of guardians on our staff, but overbroad, taking more rights than we need, or undue, meaning we put it in place just because we thought we should without a real critical eye, guardianships are dangerous, and that's what we want to avoid here. So as I start to talk about this idea, even though I've said, you know, we've got study after study that shows this idea of empowering people, building teams and layers around them is actually what makes them safer. There's never been a study in history that shows having guardianship in and of itself makes people safer. What makes people safer is all these things that we're talking about, empowering them, giving them rights and resources and lots of eyes and ears on them. But we are parents and we are caregivers to people who are vulnerable. And so we think, what if something bad happens? It could. There's no getting around that. There is not guardianship is a piece of paper. It's not, as my grant partner used to say, it's neither a chastity belt nor a suit of armor, right? It doesn't stop bad things from happening. Guardianship really is just the right for someone other than the person with the disability to sign paperwork on their behalf. That paperwork doesn't chase them around and arm wrestle them into making good decisions. We are all vulnerable. And so I think what we can do is swallow that pill of, okay, this is uncomfortable. But if what I can see in many years of scientific data and research and best practices is that using a tool like supported decision-making makes us safer, I'm willing to try that. I'm willing to give that a go. We can give that a few iterations and see what happens. And remember, we're talking about giving people just enough supports to make them successful. We're not cutting them loose and letting them fail. And it's totally person-centered. So if you have a loved one who needs many supports all the time, then let's find a way to layer those in. That's okay. Supported decision-making doesn't mean no supports or very few supports, or we're walking away and leaving the person with the disability alone or on the hook. It means we're looking at taking a real critical look at them and saying, where are your strengths and challenges and how do we play to those? And where you have a challenge, how do we build a team that you like and trust and want to go to get help? How do we create those natural incentives to get you encouraged to make good choices? And at the same time, how do we recognize that making some bad choices, that dignity of risk, is part of life and part of being human, and it's ultimately a good thing? it always teaches us in the end a little bit more about who we are and what we do and don't want to do going forward, right? I think all the time when we talk about this, how the United States is a country where statistically speaking, we are way more likely than other parts of the world to be overweight and to drink too much and to be in debt. We have challenges with trauma and relationships and accessing services and supports and making sure we receive our own health care and going to the doctor and remembering our physical, right? And these are things that we joke with amongst our friends and neighbors. Oh, I gotta cut out that extra Sunday after dinner, right? I've got to slim down a little bit. Or we joke with our coworkers about how we stayed up too late the night before and we never can seem to get in bed on time. That's part of being an adult and part of the world, right? It's not our job to make sure people with disabilities are held to a higher standard, that they must only eat healthy, spend well, have good relationships, make all good choices, never make mistakes. But we, as typically developing adults, can do all those kinds of things for the rest of our lives, and that's fair, right? We want to make sure we don't fall into that trap, which we see so often in our really intense will and desire to protect people. Okay, so here's this idea. How do I help you understand and make choices? Well, how would I even do this? That's a fair question. There's no wrong or right way to get started. I think a lot of this plays to your personality and your learning style. So I'll walk through a few of them and you see if anything sounds good to you. And if not, put questions in the Q&A bubble and say, this doesn't work for me. This is the kind of ways that I like to learn. Or is there a way to do it that looks like this? And I bet you there is. We'll figure it out. There's an amazing article that's linked at the end here called Setting the Wheels in Motion. It's written by a mom of 3 now adult children, all with developmental disabilities, who were all impacted very differently by their developmental disabilities. Suzanne Francisco is the mom, and she wrote this article as a parent-to-parent perspective, as what it was like on a journey as each of her 3 kids entered teenagehood and approached adulthood. And she was trying to figure out, hey, as legal adults who don't have the same ability to understand and make choices as your typically developing peers, how do I help you? And how do I keep you safe and make sure you're as successful as possible? And for all 3 of her children, she ultimately landed on this idea of supported decision-making, though it looks very different for each of her kids. So I like the article because it's short and it's this great parent-to-parent perspective, which we all need. But at the end, she also put these little worksheets that she made for her family that say like, and then we wrote this out and that led us here and this led us here. It's kind of following along her thought process with how she set things up. And if you read that article, which should take you a couple of minutes, and filled out those worksheets, which would take you maybe an hour, you're well on your way to having a plan out there, right? That is your plan. It's, oh, this is what we need and this is how we're going to do it. When we worked really intensely with people for more than a year on actually creating their own supported decision-making plans, then implementing them and tracking them and following through, we had people come to us with like ideas on napkins, ideas on scraps of paper. Some people made really complicated spreadsheets. Like this month of the year, I always make these decisions. These are the people I want involved. Any way that you want to start getting some ideas down is great, is my point there. There's my favorite is a tool called When Do I Want Support from the ACLU, and it's free online, and it's also linked at the end here. And it's a super simple chart on a piece of paper. So right across the top and down the side, there are little column headers and then a bunch of empty squares. And it will say things like, in this life area, let's pick one, medical. Do I ever need help making decisions? Yes or no? Yes, just about everyone's going to need help at some point making medical decisions. Okay, so let's say yes. Who do I want to help me? And here's when you'll start layering in your paid and your unpaid supporters. Well, you should have a doctor who's good at understanding you and the way you want to communicate, who uses a chart of the human body during your visits to explain things to you, who is willing to respond to your questions in writing, who is willing to make sure you have other people in the room with you if you need their help, whoever that is. So it should be hopefully your doctor or your nurse practitioner or your physician's assistant, whoever you work with, should be a paid supporter on that team. That's their job, to help you understand your medical choices. But we also want some unpaid supporters on that team, right? Is that mom who's a doctor, uncle who's a nurse, whoever that is in your life who you know and trust, or maybe just someone who has been through a lot of medical issues themselves, doesn't have any formal medical training, but knows how to navigate the system and insurance and all those kinds of things. Maybe they're your helper, and maybe you have 1 or 2 helpers, and maybe you have 10. We've seen it all. But through this document, you say, do I need support in medical? Yes. Who do I want to support me? My doctor, my nurse, my mom, my uncle, my whoever. And how do I want them to support me? And that's when you really start developing your plan. Those are things like, I want them to come to appointments with me. I want them to be jointly notified about all my appointments and test results. I want them to help me write up my questions for my appointment in advance and email them to the doctor in advance. I want them to help me follow up and make sure I get my answers in writing back, because that's how I understand them best. Whatever those things are that you need. And then at the end, we figure out, okay, what tools make that happen? Is that a HIPAA release, right? If I go into the doctor and I have breast cancer, my husband's allowed to come into the room and talk, right? I just have to sign a release form. Is it that simple? Sure. If you just want someone there to be a talker, do we need a medical power of attorney? A power of attorney is a do with document, right? I have the legal authority to do this with you, to help you understand and make these choices. If the person with the disability suddenly ended up in a coma or was having a catastrophic emergency, then they'd be the person who made the substitute decisions until the person was able to wake up again. But it's that do with. So is that I want this person to be my medical power of attorney so they can go to these appointments with me. They can help me consent to surgeries. They can help me pick up my medications at the pharmacy. They can help me whatever it is that you need. And then the ACLU document walks through all those life areas. So in medical and financial and transportation, this is May of 2022. Obviously for folks listening live, but if you're listening to this and recording, later this summer, the work group that I was mentioning with the Department of Behavioral Health is going to be releasing a template supported decision-making agreement, which is another tool that will walk you through this. Do I need help in this area? Who, how, and it can even be signed at the end. If you want to make it more official, you can even notarize it. But it's going to be another tool that's out there. Oh, and something else I want to say is oftentimes people will say like, okay, so I sat down to start thinking about this and I realized we don't have anyone to help us with relationship decisions. Like that's real awkward. My child doesn't want to talk about it with me. We don't have anyone who's an expert. Well, then lo and behold, it's kind of like when you buy a red car and you start noticing all these other red cars. Well, it's the same amount of red cars as were there before, right? We're just attuned to it more. Once you realize you need someone in this area of life, you will bring it up in casual conversation. A flyer about developmental disability appropriate sex education and a workshop that's coming up is going to catch your eye more than it would have before. And you start using this as a lens through which to see the world, and it becomes easier to build your team because you know what you need. You've got on paper, here's who we have and here's what we're missing. And it starts to cue you into those kinds of things. And as you start to meet with the folks who you do have on your team, they're likely to be very good suggesters for who else you may want to invite. Okay, so let's say we've got these ideas on paper. Yeah, I know kind of when I need help. I know who I want to do it. Maybe here's some tools I want. Well, then what do we do? And this is just as personal as the rest of this. Are you a party person? Are you I want my team to sit down and have a potluck dinner once a month, once a quarter, twice a year, whatever that looks like? Are you a social media person? I want my team to have a closed private Facebook group that no one else can see or join unless I invite them. But in that Facebook group, we can see and post and share with each other. I want to have a Google group so we communicate through email. I want to have a shared text chain. I want to have regularly scheduled Facebook video dates or FaceTime dates or Zoom dates. You figure that out. Or some people that we've worked with said, I don't want everyone on my team knowing everyone else is on my team's business. I want to keep it separate. I want to make an appointment once a month to talk with so-and-so about medical decisions and check in, and they'll come with me to my appointments. And I want them separate from my financial supporters. And I want to be able to talk to them separately. Figure out what works for you. Play to the communication style that you are comfortable with, but make some kind of plan for, if you're the person I want to help me understand and make these choices, how are we going to do that? Am I going to invite you to events on my calendar and you'll know to come with me? Do we check in on a regular basis? Do we already see each other because we live together every day? Whatever that is. And then as you go along with this process, you'll start figuring out, Do I need to sign a release form to be in the room with me? That's an easy question to ask. Doctors, banks, all kinds of folks always have those at the ready. Do I need a power of attorney that due with permission to allow them to be in the room with me, to allow them to sign with me, to allow them to process this with me? Well, that's pretty easy to do. There are resources at the end here for where you can get free or low cost powers of attorney. And I'll tell you, it's like most things in life. If you're willing to take a template and adjust it yourself and do some reading about powers of attorney, I'm talking maybe 8 total hours of work. Then you can get one for free. If you are the kind of person who says the idea of looking through that is like overwhelming to me, and I would really like a template that's fairly custom made, you can download one for online that you pay for that'll say is $60 to $100. Or you're the kind of person who says, this whole business is overwhelming to me. I would rather hire an attorney to write this that just feels good to me. Or we have an attorney we work with all the time on like end of life documents, and they're our go-to. Then you'll probably pay them usually for about an hour of their time. $300 to $400 in Northern Virginia is usually a fair estimate for that, to have a power of attorney written, as opposed to guardianship, which by comparison is usually more like $3,000 to $4,000 per person. So like with everything, the more work you're willing to do, you can bring your costs down, but there's lots of ways to do it. And over time, you'll evaluate. Maybe you started off saying, all we need is a HIPAA release form for me to go to the doctor. And then all of a sudden, there's a new diagnosis. Diabetes is in play. There's all kinds of new things to know and understand and manage. We'd like to bump us up to a power of attorney. That's going to be our new tool in the medical realm because we need more help, more support, more understanding. Well, great. And if over time you say, as it turns out, this person's actually going to the appointments on their own and they need very little help and they always remember to call us when they do need help, then maybe you bump it back down, right? It's meant to be kind of in real time customized to the person. So in our supported decision-making pilot project that's now a good handful of years old, we worked really closely with 10 people between the ages of 19 and 40 with a range of disability, guardianship status, age, gender, goodness, all kinds of things over the course of more than a year. And we worked with them to say, whatever way you want to write this plan, that's okay. We would sit down and have meetings with them using the tools that we talked about. Here's some templates. Do you like any of these? We'll use it. If you don't like any of these, we'll make something new. And then we would meet again a month later and say, okay, let's fill out who's going to be on this team and let's make sure we're checking in with all of them. And then we'd have our team together and we would say, how are things going? Well, this pilot project started in 2019. So math would tell us that before we were ending, we were deep into COVID, which was such an interesting twist to things insofar as you want to talk about a sudden change of circumstances and a trial to see whether or not this team of supporters you have set up behind you can rally. It was tremendous, right? We learned new ways to communicate with people. Almost everyone added more supporters to their team who they'd originally said that person's too far away, but we all got so used to chatting on Zoom and FaceTime, we said, oh, bring them into the fold. I learned that new skill and I'm happy to have them be a part of the team now, right? We got better at communicating and we learned, is our team sufficient to help us navigate a big change, a crisis, a loss of a job or a home or an illness or being cut off from the world or all these other kinds of things. And at the end of our little over a year working with folks, every single one of the 10 people said, I'm so glad to do this. I'm going to keep doing it. This was great for us. Of the 10 people with whom we worked, 5 had some level of guardian in place, limited or full, 5 didn't. Of the 5 people who didn't have a guardian, they ended saying, I'm glad we made that decision. Supported decision-making is what we need. Of the 5 people who had some form of guardianship, 3 of them said, I'd really like to work on peeling this back. I feel like we put guardianship in place because we were told we should, or because it was just what I thought you did. And now I realize this is a better tool for us. One person said, I can see that we are building a pathway to remove this guardianship. My goal is to do that in 5 years. And one person said, and their family said, really, we don't think we can get around the need for a guardian. Our loved one really, even with a lot of supports, can't understand and make so many choices in their life. But the supported decision-making team has broadened our network of experts and really changed the culture of how we make decisions, which makes us as parents feel like there's less pressure on us and we're making better decisions. But what we saw in the adult with a disability was they were happier. He felt more empowered. He felt like the things he wanted and that were important to him were being taken into account more. And it was many kinds of things like, you know, I know the mom would say, I know that you've been wanting to go to Disney for a really long time. So if you get a stipend for working on this project, we'll put that toward the Disney trip. Well, she said, and then I realized I should be asking him. We should be talking about this. Is this what you want to use the money on? And it was a different way of viewing and framing things. And he lit up and being asked, right? That idea of empowering people to be a part of their own lives and making sure that they are the director of their own cruise ship. That's, that's a phrase that someone else, captain of their ship. Told us often, who was in the grant project, I feel like I'm the captain of my ship now. And that really stuck with us, right? We're setting the direction as much as we can, even if we need other people to steer and implement with us. Okay, I'll walk through real quickly here some of the resources and tell you where to get to them on our website, because these are all linked. And if you're watching this live, you'll get a copy of the slides with these links. So we have an online supported decision-making library that's really big. It's got, I don't know, like more than half a dozen 1- and 2-page handouts, things like what's supported decision-making, how do I build my team, what if my team disagrees, what are some pros and cons, how does this compare to guardianship, all kinds of things. We've got 3-minute videos about the basics of supported decision-making. We've got 5-minute videos from supported decision-making users talking about it. We've got half-hour, 1 hour, hour-and-a-half presentations from me and field experts and attorneys talking about various aspects of this, ways to ask questions, as well as links to all the other resources on this page. So if you just get to our library, it'll take you to all the rest of this too. There's a National Resource Center on supported decision-making that has stories and videos. They have sample agreements you can use. The Center for Public Representation is another national organization, and they have news on supported decision-making and supported decision-making laws across the country and other kinds of sample forms you can use. The Disability Law Center of Virginia is our state protection and advocacy agency, and they have a free online power of attorney builder. Like I told you, this is one of those areas where if you're willing to put in some time and do some of it yourself, you can work with a free tool. They help with advanced directives, which are those tools that say things like, you know, if I'm in a catastrophic state, if I'm in a coma, this is what I want to happen, etc. And they've got lots of information on rights and choices. There's a book that I love written by one of our grant partners, Jonathan Martinez, and the book is called Supported Decision Making. You can find it on Amazon. And it's a pretty friendly read in terms, it's written by an attorney, but it's very readable to anyone. And it's got ideas for wording, some cool things that you can include in powers of attorney, background on how supported decision making kind of came to be in Virginia and the courts and how that kind of really spurred a big movement, and lots of the data that I referenced on supported decision making and increasing safety. The Setting the Wheels in Motion article from that mom is there that I mentioned. The Jenny Hatch Justice Project has its own website. Jenny Hatch is a woman in Virginia. She had Down syndrome. She had an IQ, which I'm referencing only because it was used as a point in the case of, I want to say 50. At any rate, they said, well, someone with Down syndrome with an IQ of 50 can't possibly make their own choices. So guardianship was put in place with pretty catastrophic results. And the Jenny Hatch Justice Project talks about the fight to remove that guardianship in favor of supported decision-making, because when all the experts about Jenny were interviewed on the stand, they would say, can Jenny make this decision? And they would all say, only with help. She can only do that with help. Well, that's what supported decision-making is. That's how most of us make choices. So the question was, how do we layer in that help? The ACLU tool called When Do I Want Support, that kind of fill-in chart is there. And then the ARC of the United States has a supported decision-making toolkit too. Okay, so I'm happy to take questions. I'll take the slides away so that you can see my face, and I'll go to the questions in the Q&A bubble first, and feel free to keep them coming. Do you have a good Virginia Durable Power of Attorney document that I share with individuals and families? Oh, so we just kind of talked about this a little bit. So I usually tell people to go to the Disability Law Center of Virginia, because you can build your free Durable Power of Attorney online. There are lots of kinds of powers of attorney. You can have a power of attorney for only medical decisions, for only financial decisions. You can have medical and financial powers of attorney if you want help with both. Or you can have something called a durable power of attorney, which is really like any place that I'm going to be signing, I've got that help. on board. And so that durable power of attorney is great because it's kind of a multi-use document. Some people make a durable power of attorney and still want a financial power of attorney because they only want to show their bank that one. Virginia Department of Education puts out a free special education power of attorney, which I think is so key because once a student turns 18, there's no mandate, unless there's a power of attorney or other kinds of legal authority in place, for the school to notify parents about an IEP or allow parents to participate. So if we're heading down this road of supported decision-making, VDOE wrote that document. So you know the schools are going to consider it valid. And in just a couple of minutes, you can make sure that that's in place. And sometimes we've had families who say things like, oh, our guardianship won't be put in place for several months after the child turns 18. Well, then it can be a stopgap if it's an appropriate tool for them. Or sometimes folks say, turns out this is all that we needed. And we didn't need to go down the road of guardianship, and this was so easy. So there are really great tools out there. But one of the things that I love about powers of attorney is that they can be completely customized to the person in terms of law. In terms of getting people to agree with them, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which says you really need to be making any reasonable accommodation for the person with a disability. So let's walk through an example of what that could look like. Someone with a disability is going to set up a bank account. So they go to the bank and they have a financial power of attorney. And they say on that financial power of attorney, debit cards are hard for me, or they say this to themselves and with their team, debit cards are hard for me because that money feels very abstract. I don't want a debit card. It's confusing to me and I can't remember how much I spent. So you could write on that power of attorney, this account holder is not to be given a debit card. This person is only to have checks and all checks need 2 signers. And then the bank says, actually, the only checks we have that require 2 signers are for businesses. And you say, I am so glad we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which says if you do it for them, it's a pretty reasonable accommodation to do it for me. And the bank says, I guess so. So if the only way you want to spend money is checks that have 2 signatures, you can do that. Or you want to make sure that your account statements are emailed and texted to 3 people instead of 1 because you got 3 supporters on your team, I can do that. You want to make sure multiple people can have logins to your online account information, I can do that. You want to make sure some of those people can log in and see the accounts, but not move or touch the money because their job is only to help you understand it, but not do for you. I can do that. Those are all the kinds of things that you can write into your power of attorney. It can be as nitpicky specific as you absolutely want and need it to be. And you're using the tool of the Americans with Disabilities Act to say, this is why we're doing this. The Americans with Disabilities Act, again, requires any kind of reasonable modification. So you're not saying, I want my own personal banker who's going to come to my house every day. They would say, well, that's not reasonable for us. But things like easy ways to access account monitoring, account notifications, those kinds of things are certainly the kinds of things that you can ask a bank to do. And same with the doctor's office, right? You usually only allow 1 person to log into the account. Let's find a way for 2, right? Whatever it is that you want to layer in there, you can write into your power of attorney and have it, then that's kind of the law of the land, right? And then you can give a copy to your bank or your doctor or your landlord or whoever it is that you're using it with, and they can keep that copy on file. And that's that bare permission to go back later. So if, for example, you moved into a new apartment, you give a copy of this durable power of attorney to the landlord and your dad calls because he's concerned about trash pickup. They don't say, oh, I can't talk to you, you're not the leaseholder. They say, oh, I see you're a power of attorney for a leaseholder. Let's work through this. Let's figure this out together. Okay. Oh, someone just said something really nice in the chat. Thank you. I really love webinars because we can record them and then people can see them later and go back over it. I need things repeated, but I don't get to see any tones or faces. So thank you for nice words. They're much appreciated. Oh, so here's a great question. I don't have a network with all those people that I would need to provide support. So now what? Excellent question. So first, start with what you do have. Pull out the ACLU When Do I Want Supports document or that Suzanne Francisco worksheet or whatever. I've yet to meet with someone who didn't have a few more people to add to that list than they thought. But no matter what, once we have ideas on paper, we know where our holes are. So you start saying, I really don't have anyone with expertise in this area. Well, ideally in all areas, we'd had some professional and some some unpaid supporters, right? Like we talked about the doctor, and then maybe your aunt who's a nurse who's just giving you some advice on the side. So then start layering, who are the paid professionals in my child's life? The people who run their ABLE account or special needs trust, the people who are my financial advisor as the mom, because I'm the person who's passing my inheritance on to my child. My financial advisor is going to be part of my child's support team. They need to be looking out for them because ultimately they're going to be managing those benefits for my child, right? So you start layering in, okay, who are all of these professionals? And then take the people you do have and start saying, okay, do you have ideas? Or start saying to people you trust, do you know anyone who works in this area? Do you know anyone who volunteers in this area, right? No one in the world, golly, especially in this terrible time of the pandemic, is as connected to the world as we would like to be. So I wouldn't expect anyone to sit down and say, I've got 25 people who I want on my supported decision-making team all raring to go. That would be super unusual. Wanting a team of 25 people would also be unusual, but we did have someone who fell into that boat. You don't need everybody to be on your supported decision-making team, right? You may have someone who has no professional expertise at all in financial issues, but you just know they're the kind of person you know and trust who's really good at paying their own bills. And you say, hey, would you just be willing to be an extra set of eyes and ears on this? We know that you are so good at managing your own money. Can you just help give advice when we have a question? And that person will probably say, it's so nice that you think that. Sure, I'm happy to answer your questions, right? And then over time, as you meet new people, the supporters that you have will help you identify and fill those holes. That's part of their role as supporters. They're helping you build this team. But you'll know where your holes are and you'll have that lens on and you'll start thinking about people. And sometimes as we work through this exercise with folks in person, we really started going back in time, right? We said like, okay, we live in a magical age in terms of digital connection. We're not limited by people who are close by. Is there anyone you've fallen out of contact with because they moved far away, but you knew and loved and trusted? Can we reach back out to them? Is there a teacher or a teacher's aide or a therapist who just like really connected with, who'd be willing to give a couple of minutes of their time here and there to give some ideas or advice? Let's reach back out to them. Our networks are pretty much always broader than we think. And one of the examples I give a lot is like, there are lots of roles people can play on a team. When my oldest daughter, who had phenomenal sensory sensitivities, but very curly hair, strangers wanted to touch. And so she would just like scream. When she went to the grocery store with me, there was a woman at our Trader Joe's, Martha, who we love, who got my daughter as a toddler, who was like screaming and having meltdowns in the store as I was on the cusp of screaming. And Martha, she just got her. She just like knew my daughter. And this was 7.5 years ago we met her. Now we frequently go to give Martha flowers on her birthday. My daughter goes to Trader Joe's on her birthday to see Martha and celebrate together. Martha is part of our supported decision-making team insofar as Martha's a mom of 4. We see her every week when we go to the grocery store. My daughter trusts her for advice. My daughter has known her so long. Martha has our number, has my husband's number. If something's ever wrong with Ophelia, if we stop showing up to the grocery store, she's going to call us. It's just those other eyes and ears. Not every supporter has to have a huge amount of expertise or a huge role in your life, and you don't have to fall in love with Martha at Trader Joe's like I did. But like my point is, like, if your loved one gets a bag of chips at the same 7-Eleven every day of the week, then that 7-Eleven cashier should have a phone number to contact of, this person didn't look right today. Someone in the store was mean to them. They're actually doing a really great job. The attendant you sent in with them today was really kind, right? Your supporter network can be really big. It's the eyes and ears in the community, the people down the hall, down the street who are just willing to keep a lookout. There's all kinds of supporters out there. Oh, how does a person's case manager or support providers fit into this? I love this question. In part, that depends upon who your support coordinator is, but really the answer is, okay, well, let's look at this person's support plan. What do they need help with? If they need help with understanding residential and employment choices, well, then their supporter should be part of that. Their support coordinator should be part of that support team, right? As a support coordinator, they are paid to help the person pursue employment and residential services and the life of their choice. So their job is, if we want to sign a HIPAA release, to have them communicate with other people, You know, my son's uncle used to be work at a temp agency for 15 years. He's a great person to talk to about employment. We want them on the team. We want the support coordinator coordinating with them too. We want him to be able to come to annual planning meetings, whatever that is. You layer in the people as you think it makes sense, and keep things private from them as you think it makes sense. But absolutely, support coordinators are one of the great groups of paid professionals who should be a part of this team. They should be helping the person understand and make choices, and working with the other supporters to help them understand and make choices. What if my adult child has an I don't need any help approach, not unusual for adult children of all abilities, and charges ahead with no guidance? There is no easy answer here. If there was, you would have found it because you are a mom, and moms find the answers. I think the tougher answers are finding that leverage, that carrots and sticks, rewards and benefits, and consequences approach, right? So it's that real honest discussion of, I can't stop you from doing this. Again, let's say even if you had guardianship. Guardianship is a piece of paper. If someone goes out and steals a car, crashes it, refuses to take their medication, refuses to let someone who's a support staff in their door, guardianship, supported decision-making, none of that can change that. What you're doing here is trying to find the way that that person is willing to receive some help, right? In supported decision-making, we work a lot on what was called dream inspired planning. So like imagine on your hand is this little chart. And at the end, the person said, what I really want to be is someone who works with animals. Then we would say things like, okay, you should know that if you're going to get paid to do a job, you have to be clean. Employers won't hire you and won't work with you if you come into an interview smelling badly and poorly dressed. So if you want to work with animals, we need to work on those hygiene skills. And if you want to work with animals, you're going to need to take a class that looks like this or volunteer at a place that looks like this, right? And so anything that we ask the person to do, we tie directly to their dream. If this is what you want, here's what it takes to get there. We will help you. You don't want me to help you? Who do you want to help you? Sometimes a miracle with people with disabilities is either peer-based support, a similar aged peer hired to help them because that similar aged peer is often viewed as cooler than us moms and dads. How dare they? And sometimes advice is taken a lot better from them, or tech-based supports. Our team here works a lot on apps like TravelMate and SafetyMate and DailyMate that can give electronic either monitoring or prompts to say, maybe you take it better as a reminder from your app to get in the shower if the app reminds you with your favorite song and then plays your favorite YouTube video afterward and gives you a virtual check mark than you do with mom because you feel like she's nagging you, right? It's that complicated balance of what do we know about you? How can we frame this in a way that's getting you to where you want? And how do we layer in the supports you're most willing to accept? Also accepting the fact that we can't make anyone on the earth do anything, right? We are doing our best to find leverage. And sometimes folks have a lot of stumbles and a lot of bad choices and really put that dignity of risk piece of things to the test before they're successful. And sometimes people are on the long road to do that, is the honest reality, right? We don't stop working. We don't stop being creative. We don't stop trying to put new tools in place, talking about natural consequences, giving rewards, whatever works for that person. But it is a tricky, like so many things in parenting, right? It's a real tricky journey. Those are just some of the ideas that we have seen. We're at time here and I want to be respectful of folks' time. So I will go ahead and stop our recording and thank you all so much for coming.